week so far with panels and talks and so much going on around the show floor. So many exciting virtual production activations, and we've gathered a wonderful panel of talented individuals, people who are currently innovating day in and day out in virtual production, and we're going to talk about the state of virtual production. So before we get started on the conversation, I'm going to have everyone go ahead and introduce themselves, starting with Tim.
Hi, my name is Tim. I'm the CEO of View, and we're a network of virtual production stages here in North America and now in the UK.
Hi, I'm Joe. I work for Epic Games. I'm the business development manager with a focus on in-camera visual effects, but M&E in general.
Hi, my name is Noah Kadner. I am the virtual production editor at American Cinematographer Magazine, and I also host the Virtual Production Podcast. And for these guys, I wrote a set of guides called the Virtual Production Field Guide for Epic Games. So, big fan.
And you have an LED screen in your living room.
And I have an LED screen in my living room. Exactly. This feels like I'm right at home here, literally. So
exclusively for Zoom calls only. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, perfect. I'm JT Rooney. I'm with XR Studios, and we've been around in this XR world for more of the multi-camera broadcast side of things. And we have a new studio in Hollywood that just opened up. So excited to chat.
Very cool. So there's this term called virtual production, and we've obviously all heard it, but there's also different meanings within virtual production. You have ICVFX, XR, all kinds of stuff. And so, the question I would like to ask, and this is open for any of you to answer, but how do you define virtual production?
So really it's the combining of physical and virtual production and leveraging real-time technology. That's like the broadest term you can kind of call it, because it does touch on so many different things. Like you were just mentioning, it means something different to everybody who uses it. And I think JT can go into a bunch of stuff on that too. But yeah, it means something different to someone who works in previs to in-camera visual effects. But essentially, yeah, it's the combining of the virtual and the physical.
It's been interesting because it's changed over the last however many, people think 3 years, but it's really 10 years and 20 years and like all over time. So it's a very vague term, but it's helpful because we can all cover a lot of things with it. Same with XR. Extended reality could mean a million different things, and we kind of actually like that. We lean into it because we're using screens now, but we'll see where we're using 10 years from now. Something's going to change. So it's very interesting to see it grow. But virtual production for us, like a lot of times, yeah, ICVFX is really helpful. Tie-in is cameras and screens, virtual and real being combined for sure.
Very cool. So a question I have for you, Noah,
Right.
Obviously being like the expert of virtual production, all-knowing in the industry, what are some of the things that you saw yesterday, day one of NAB, that are getting you excited about the landscape of virtual production right now?
Oh yeah, okay. I mean, there's just a lot of it's cool because, thanks to the miracle of the pandemic, a lot of this stuff kind of happened, under the ocean, so to speak, because we didn't have NAB year after year after The Mandalorian came out. There were kind of these 2 leap years that nobody saw any of this stuff that wasn't already working with it. So now that we've had a year since NAB came back, it's really fascinating to see a lot of new purpose-built stuff coming out this year, specifically targeting that workflow and not just a repurposing of existing gear. So I'm starting to see lights that are really designed for doing things like interactive visual effects and in-camera shots, reflections, and feeding them video. Screens that are becoming higher density and greater color range. So, it's really a good time, I think, to really look around and see all this new stuff that's coming out there. And Tim has something, a little plug for Tim. So talk a little bit about that. You have something that really ties a lot of what is the cutting edge stuff happening today into virtual production.
Yeah, we're launching today a new software platform called Virtual Studio by View. And what we've found is over the last 2 years, the workflow has been a little bit of a hack. The science project putting all these things together, from the engine to the playback, the processor, the screen, and we've developed some ways to make that workflow a little easier. And so it's essentially an orchestration layer that allows several real-time applications to interchange the files and make virtual production a little bit easier. And so we've all been on that journey together, figuring out, all right, what works for this? And sometimes you'll use the same stage, but in 3 different ways, whether it's car process or fully 3D or 2.5D plates. And so being able to have the workflow that's agile but still makes things easier is kind of what we've been developing.
Very cool. And maybe playing off that a little bit, I'm curious to know, like, what are some of the innovations that you're seeing, Tim? And I'd also like to hear your perspective on this too, Joe, as it relates to virtual production, because we do often think, oh, virtual production, these massive LED walls, but the tool that we're releasing has nothing to do with LED walls on the surface. And so maybe talk about that side of the.
Yeah, I think one thing that's just really accelerated the past 3 to 6 months has been the generative AI tools. When you look at how good Midjourney is now, there's a lot of things it creates that is so photorealistic people can't tell if it was made by a person on a computer. And so it's frightening for creatives to think about how dangerously capable technology is now. And not only is it capable, it's radically accessible. So every person, has access to this. And it's something that, we want to harness as a creative community. It's another tool that can bring your vision to life. But I would say that's been the biggest thing I've seen lately is we have a lot of generative tech tools that are now on the market, but being able to put those into workflows easier is what I think we're going to see in the next few months here.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing a lot right now is kind of the process refinement. So people are spending less time in the volume, but because they're doing more preparation. So seeing kind of the previs techniques, kind of all of the visualization, people are working towards kind of spending more time on that side of the process. So when you get to the volume, you actually know what you're going to be doing, you know what you're going to be shooting, and that's where you have efficiencies, and that's where you're saving time and money and effort. And that's something that I think has been exciting me recently because it's more fun in terms of the iteration. That's what real-time technology is. So you're watching the filmmakers who are just having an absolute blast in their VR headset, kind of doing their virtual scouting, and it's making things more accessible and more fun.
I think that's the best part about it is that when people can actually have fun with it and play with it, you can actually do what it's supposed to be doing. And that's always been our approach of having a stage where we were always a little bit like over encompassing every part of it just to make sure that it works so that people can focus on doing cool stuff with it versus like, hey, does Genlock work today or whatever, And so that's been the exciting thing for us is seeing like it's, the fact that, 20% of this floor is virtual production is cool because people are talking about it and there's still so much education, but you're getting more and more people coming onto stages who have shot somewhere else before or have heard of it at least, as opposed to starting from complete scratch, which was pretty wild in 2020 or 2021. So it's fun to see it like just becoming louder and more known, which is great.
I love that. And let's stay there for a second because something that came up on our pre-call that was really exciting to me, and I think will be to our audience too, is this focus on content and the types of content that we're creating in virtual production. There is a lot of focus and attention on the big budget, $100 million feature films and all these things, but we're also seeing virtual production permeate every layer of the industry. So I'd love to hear your collective thoughts, but maybe let's start with you, JT, and some of what you're doing at XR Studios and the type of content you're producing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when we started, it was in a lot of big entertainment stuff, so big pop stars, and like in the same way that you saw Mandalorian, and you're like, oh, this is unachievable. If someone sees some big fancy person doing it, you're like, oh, I can't reach that. But we've seen in the last couple of years more recurring work or more like shows that appear over time, and they're realizing that this helps save time in a really interesting way. Like it's virtual, so you just bring the set back up 6 months later, and it's still there. You don't have to store it. So we're seeing more of that, and definitely what we've been all talking about a bit is like seeing the new, Gen Z culture and TikTok and YouTube videos and Twitch streams and your living room. Like it's just becoming so much easier and more accessible, like the Mars tracker and stuff like that. Like as it becomes more common, you're seeing more interesting use cases for it. So it makes it quite complicated though, because someone's comparing the same workflow from a giant film set to what's happening in someone's living room. And like, how do you even speak about that? It's interesting, but yeah, we're seeing more and more like normal stuff, which is great. That's what we want.
Yeah, I mean, to speak from the living room perspective, but I mean, if you want to build something the size of, View Studios Vegas, which is absolutely awesome, you need a lot of dough. If you're a freelancer and you want to just try and get your head into this, we have this stage that we built in our living room, true, but we recently renovated it, and so for about a month, I didn't have anything to sit in front of. So I just went to an OLED TV that we had on the wall, an 80-inch OLED TV, and just literally had my back against it, and it looked pretty good. So, I mean, that is what is fascinating to me about this whole process is it's the same basic idea conceptually. It's just how much infrastructure you want to scale around it, what you need to achieve. If you want to do like 100 people running behind a car, yeah, you need a big volume. If you want to do a couple of talking heads in an apartment, you might be able to get away with something quite a bit more modest, and then you will have that practice to get into it. So I think we're all very intrigued by the idea that this should not be a kind of only big budget kind of thing. It should be accessible to all at some level, and it is. It's just there's some creativity you need to think about to get into it, which is in theory what we're all here for anyway, right?
I think we're going to see some of these high-end visual effects films in the future being shot by kids with projector screens. Because at the end of the day, the software is free. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
The software is free. The technology is so much more accessible than ever before. We were talking yesterday about the richest billionaires in the world use the same phones that are in your pockets. They use the same computers that you use. Big business and small business, there's not this big divide now, that technical gap that used to be. So while some of this is a little bit expensive, at the end of the day, you're right, it's way more accessible than it used to be. We'll see those medium production companies start layering in virtual production, I think, in the next year or two in a way that's very normal. That'll just get integrated into every studio out there. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there in the fact that Unreal Engine has been obviously a huge player. None of virtual production today would be possible without Epic Games. And so, Joe, I'd love to have you talk a little bit about the ethos and the vision of Epic as it relates to virtual production and the things that you're pioneering for creators all across the spectrum.
Yeah, so Miles, who was meant to be doing this panel, but he got sick, which is why I jumped in. So he likes to talk about kind of what we try and do is kind of shape the success of what everyone's doing. So people come to us as like consultancy to kind of push their projects forward. But like for me, I have this super unique lens into the whole industry because we have NDAs with 99% of the companies out there, and kind of we know all the projects that are happening, and it's opened up the boundaries where everybody's talking. It's created a community like you've never seen before. And that's one of our drives as well, is like building this community together, because it's all about empowering creators. That's literally what the plan is to just let people be free with this tool that can build experiences that everybody enjoys. That's kind of the bigger picture of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on that comment, but this is what fascinates me about coming from a game engine as a basis for production. It's completely different from everything else you see out on the floor here, which is a lot of, interconnected but essentially individual sort of manufacturers. Whereas the whole concept of a game engine is to embrace community, because you've got people all over the universe, well, let's say at least this planet, that are playing these games that want to be connected. And so the tool is there to facilitate that. So bringing that into the movie production world, where we're used to kind of being siloed off in a way, it's kind of fascinating because now there's this sort of community just built in because it's baked into the DNA of the tool.
And that changes production as well. Like when you're on set now, you're seeing like the VFX supervisor, the DIT, and the gaffer over in a corner talking, and like these three humans would not normally be speaking. Like they're meeting each other for the first time and coming up with cool ideas, and you're seeing the results on screen. So that openness is creating new stuff, which is what is exciting. So like earlier we were saying, like I'm excited to get out of the like ooh look shiny toy phase and like what can we do with it, and that's starting to happen, which is great.
Yeah, I'm starting to see too, like even from a culture perspective, when you're using real-time technology every day, it kind of gets you in this mindset of expecting it. Like we have this thing where we would have a meeting and we talk about a press release and just kind of look like, okay, is that done yet? We're like, no, we just talked about it. Yeah, well, we can 3D visualize a scene instantly. Can we just get that press release instantly too? So it starts to get everyone in the mindset of, can we do these things faster? And it makes it exciting because the quicker you can see the final image, to get that vision, out of your head and onto the screen, it gets everyone a part of the process, because you can't collaborate until everyone can see it. And that's just what I love about Unreal and how it's completely changed production.
Awesome. I love what you said there. And no, I'm going to have this next question you start with. we've obviously seen a ton of innovation in recent years, but we've also seen a blending of the technology world with production in a way that I know I haven't experienced before. Obviously we've seen it on some pioneering films and filmmakers like James Cameron and so on and so forth, but we're now seeing this happen at scale. So I'd love for you to share a little bit of insight into that and why virtual production may be a little different in bringing technology more into the production process.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what you see is what you get. If you go back and I'm just barely old enough to remember what it was like before we had printers sitting on our desks, and like the idea of making a document was this sort of black box situation where you were typing on a computer screen and ultimately it would show up on a printer looking completely different from what you were typing on. So the idea now that everybody can see it just in front of their eyes and react to it and make changes and hopefully make it better is kind of fascinating. And yeah, I mean, it's like anything else. It started at the very high end. I mean, when Jon Favreau and Lucasfilm and Disney decided to embrace this technology for a Star Wars TV series, they essentially had unlimited resources. We don't. But the fact that they proved that it was possible means we get to all benefit from that initial investment. It was kind of the big bang of this whole thing. And so I think, yeah, you're going to just see that proliferate more and more, because once you see how flexible and usable it is at almost any scale, yeah, you can start to think of new ways. I mean, that's what's happening now. I think you're seeing productions like that Netflix 1899 series that really wouldn't have been possible to achieve without embracing this technology. And now that people can see how it functions, I think we're just going to see more and more productions that really lean into it and take advantage of it. And just essentially, the sky is the limit, because once you understand how that works, you can just really go to town with it.
I think it's exciting that 1889 shows a great reference, because anytime anyone does anything in this community that is using the tech for a specific reason, I think it just resonates so much more. Like this Katy Perry thing we did 3 years ago, people still look at it because it was actually solving a problem. She wanted to be in a cartoon world, and it's like, this is actually the best solution for this problem, and it just resonates in a way. There's a little bit of, like, to talk about the good and the bad of everything right now, is that we've been really trying to make sure, and I think it's changing with everyone over time, but you should use the tech for the right reason, right? Like, you should use it, if you're supposed to be swimming in the ocean with sharks and stuff like that, like, maybe you should just go to the beach, like, I love this tech, but like, you need to have the right tools for it, and sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. And I think seeing it grow and seeing it get connected is good, but yeah, people also learning what makes sense. It doesn't have to solve everything.
We've been in that a few times. We're in a creative stage, and you start getting into something that shouldn't be virtual production. Or like, we were trying to do a playground, and like, okay, we're in the slide and the screens, and then should we just shoot this on the playground? Yeah, and so there's some stuff that just still makes sense to shoot traditionally. Then there's a lot of things that can take that to the next level, because if you want the slide flying in the air and you want the swings to swing by themselves, that's stuff that you can do in virtual production.
Yeah, it's all about where you if it's not possible to shoot in real life, do it in virtual production. That's why it leans really nicely into sci-fi. There's other kind of situations where if you're working with kids, it's much easier to have a controlled environment like a volume than be outside in the elements. The other situations is where like you really need say a specific type of lighting for 6 pages of dialogue for a film. Like, that's where it really sings. Is like, that's where you can save time and money and actually give your actors a better experience, because they don't have to get up at 6 a.m. for the one little 5 minutes of light that you need to get the right shot. You can just bring that into the volume and work backwards from there. So it's like, excuse me, it's those experiences where you feel like it's not possible in real life. That's where it really sings in virtual production.
Let's talk a little bit, continuing on the technology trend, with some of the new things that have come out that we thought were maybe a decade away but are here already, and that is the elephant in the room of generative AI. So we have phenomenal tools that we're all familiar with, like Midjourney and GPT, but also emerging tools like Kubrick and others who are working on ways to integrate this into our pipelines. So I'm curious, high-level view with some of the leading experts in this industry, how do you see artificial intelligence, generative AI, impacting us over the next few years?
We'll go in order. How about that? I mean, for us, we helped Sehan Lee, who's here somewhere walking around, create this tool called Kubrick, and it's this awesome tool to take text-to-image generations, and then you put it into a 2.5D space. So you get a little bit of parallax, you get to see it on stage, and enter it into a virtual production environment. The ironic thing is we did that in October, and the world has changed 100 times since then. But the point of that tool is not, hey, what's the most recent version, all sort of stuff like that. It's about getting people comfortable and into that environment and starting that process, and then being paired with a creative company like Sehan Lee who can help push it further because they know every other tool that I haven't even heard about yet. So for us, it's like we're seeing those baby steps happen, and then it just like skyrocketing really quickly. So the image stuff is great. The Nerf to Unreal plugin, Ian Messon has been working on that a ton on the East Coast. There's some really cool stuff there. But it's a lot of the tech stuff for us that I've seen quite a lot is ChatGPT, seeing a lot of people on our team like writing blueprints in Unreal using that. And it's just the speed and iteration of it is actually a little bit terrifying because it's not like, oh, it's going to take my job, but it's just like, oh, I can't keep up with it. I just mentally, I'm one human versus, AI robots. It's just a different thing. So I think that's been the interesting part is like the pace that you were talking about earlier, Tim, is like the pace of everything is so fast. And that will be a huge change for all of us once you introduce AI into production. In the middle of a production, if things can just zoom forward that fast, it just changes how you act,
Yeah, it's like AI is kind of the starting point, the template that people kind of can build off of. So it really speeds up the process. So even if you're talking about ChatGPT and you want it to create a business proposal for you, you're not going to use that business proposal like off the bat, but that gives you the point that you're going to edit from. And it's going to be the same in like the Unreal Engine's obviously open source and people make their own plugins, so it's just interesting for us seeing all the different kind of ways that people are building tools and plugins, like you just mentioned a couple there. But it's really going to be like the barrier to starting a project where you see an artist type something in, I need a desert scene with 45 trees, etc., etc. It's going to give them that platform that they can then go in and iterate and work from. So I think that it's going to speed up production quite a lot.
Yeah, I think real-time visualization is something that we're going to see here in the next 2 years, where if we come back to NAV and have an LED screen behind us, that visualizing these ideas in their image equivalent, I think is something that we're not too far off of. And if you think about visual storytelling just as a communication tool, it's the most powerful communication tool in the world. If you think about IKEA, who has the most complicated furniture, they use visuals for their instructions. It's a universal language. And so the idea of being able to not only just take your speech and try to communicate that way, but then to have the visual support, I think we're going to start to see that not just be a production layer, but really a tool moving forward to help them communicate.
Yeah, I mean, I find it fascinating. I think it's funny because it gets a bad rap because everybody saw the Terminator in 2001 and they have this idea that AI is some kind of dangerous thing that's going to, wreck the world. But the truth is, it really is just a translator device if you think about it. It's like, I don't know how to program. I don't know how to do stuff in 3D. I don't know how to, whatever. There's an AI that can take your plain language that everybody hopefully knows, in whatever language you speak even, and just translate into whatever it needs to be. I want a business proposal. Boom, here's a business proposal. I want a blueprint. Here's a blueprint. I don't need to learn all these esoteric languages or at least master them, but now I can essentially work with them directly through this mechanism of an AI. So to me, that's extremely powerful because it essentially levels the playing field. I don't need to be a programmer anymore. I don't need to be an expert animator. Those people are great when I want to do additional work on something, but if I just want to start the ball rolling with my own ideas, I can just go and iterate, and that is great. I mean, that's kind of the dream we all have is, I have this vision, I want to achieve it, but I don't have resources. Now you do, so it's great.
We had our first shoot last week where a creative director who's not in this industry at all came to us with boards that they made all in Midjourney. Like, I want it to look like this, and everyone in the room was like, oh, okay, great. Just saved 2 weeks of phone calls and all sort of stuff like that. It felt a little weird, I'm not gonna lie. Like, there's a weird feeling of everyone like, what does this actually mean? But it worked really well, and we were able to move on, and it's great. So the nice thing, though, is that director didn't think, oh, now I'm gonna do this whole shoot by myself. They were just like, this is how I can get this weird idea out of the back of my head, and I think that's why it was great. So for us, like one last bit on the AI stuff is that I agree. I don't see it as this really negative thing. We're trying to see the positive in it, but we are trying to remind people that it is a tool to be used. And when a tool is being used by a team of creatives who have years of experience, you can leverage it really fast. When you give it to someone on the street and say, "Hey, go make Star Wars with it," like there's some learning there that's going to take some time, you know. So it's hopefully people can see the good in it and help it grow. But it's a wild ride right now. It's crazy.
Yeah, I gotta say, I used Midjourney for our boards for our Unreal Ride activation in the lobby, and it is amazing how much time it saved. You know, the back and forth, exactly like you said, and it is just getting started. It's a really exciting place to be. Again, as technology and production is coming together, virtual production, I feel like, is really well positioned.